Hello and welcome back to the Q&A. So, as always, if you want to leave a question, just stick it down in the comments. And in terms of questions, the more things that are about topics and kind of broader things like that, the better. Most of the time, if there's like a yes/no kind of question, then I'll save them up for a big Q&A where I just blast through a whole bunch of them. First one is from Subtle Viper, and it is, do you think patches will be 3 months to 4 months, like in Mists of Pandaria, or back to 6 months? Also, do you think that 18 months is good for every expansion pack? Well, there's really two questions in here, and let's get on to the first one, which is about the amount of months between patches. Well, I'm very much sure that it's going to be a patch every 3 or 4 months, like in Mists of Pandaria. Now, in terms of what the patches would be, well, I'd say you'll have every 6 months, there's a new raid tier, and then in between those raid tiers, that's when they put in the smaller content patches that perhaps add a few systems or just some more content. Stuff like Battlefield Barons, but perhaps a little bit bigger. They have increased the team, or at least are planning to, by an additional 40% on top of the previous 40% they did during Mists of Pandaria, so they will be able to make more and more content, I suppose. I could actually even see it being a little bit faster. They did say that eventually they'd like to be up to near monthly patches, but they definitely don't think they'll make that goal by Warlords of Draenor. What that perhaps does indicate, though, is that instead of just getting every 3 months one large patch, perhaps every month and a half, or maybe every 2 months, we get a piece of dynamic content added or something like that. The way I think things will work is that you get a new raid tier every 6 months, and in that new raid tier you'll get something akin to the Timeless Isle. I think that raid tiers at a pace that's faster than that isn't actually good, because a lot of the time with the raid tier, it takes people a good few months to get through them. And if people just pile on the content, people feel like they're getting behind and they start leaving the game and that sort of thing. So yeah, I think every 6 months is quite good for a raid tier. But as for content in between that, well, the Timeless Isles, as an example, didn't really hold. Like, it's been, what, 2.5 months since that was all released, and I'm pretty sure that place is half deserted at the minute. And fair enough, it didn't have a great deal of structure, it didn't have a great deal of depth beyond the initial, okay, this is a kind of cool new system, and I suppose that's really okay, because this was the first large-scale implementation of that kind of design. Now, I think this whole sandbox open-ended thing is great. It's better than dailies, and it's more importantly, it's more fun than dailies. It might not last as long as dailies because there isn't as much of an artificial grind. Normally, I know people could talk about Xiaohao, but in terms of the general content, there's not as much as an artificially, exaggerated grind as it is with questing, or not questing dailies, where it's, oh yeah, you need to reach Exalted Rep. This is going to take you 35 days if you do every quest. Is that fun? Nope. So I think that this dynamic content is great, but what would be best is if they're adding new bits of dynamic content every 2 months, I'd say. Honestly, I would rather get a patch that's, say, 2/3 the size of one of those interim patches, and then maybe get them twice as quick. And I know that does equal more content, so of course that's a good thing, but with the team increasing in size, I think that's definitely going to be feasible. As for them returning back to the whole patch every 6 months thing, I don't think that's going to happen, and the reason for that is because of subscriber churn. Now, if you don't know what subscriber churn is, essentially people are always coming to the game and coming back from the game. Did that make sense? I'm not sure. Essentially, people leave when they're done with content a lot of the time, and they come back when there's new content. So by providing new content at a more regular pace, you're ensuring people keep up their subscription from month to month. And really, the way the game's going now, it wouldn't surprise me if there are actually more players than they can really count subscriptions, and say if they counted people who were subscribed within, when they were doing earnings calls, if they counted subscribers within the previous 3 months, I think that number would be not massively higher, but at least decently higher, because a lot of people will, and they'll see a new patch come out, they'll do that month subscription, they'll go in, they'll enjoy the content, and then they think, well, that was fun, I'll enjoy coming back to World of Warcraft in 3 months or whenever the new patch comes out. And that isn't really what Blizzard want as a business, and this is one of those times when what's best for their business interests is also best for us as players, because we get more content. If you compare things like, say, patches, some of the previous patches you maybe got in Cataclysm or stuff like that, okay, maybe 1 or 2 of them were a little bit bigger. I think a good example of a patch that was bigger than what we currently expect for a patch would be, say, Icecrown Citadel, in which we got 3 different dungeons and a massive raid. 4.4, wherever the final Cataclysm one doesn't count because the raid was short and absolutely awful. So yeah, it's all about keeping pretty good, good quality content coming out on a regular pace to keep people going, and because of that, it's going to be 3 to 4 months. Personally, I want that to be every 2 to 3 months, with every third month being not every third, every like 6 months, so every 2, 3 months. God damn, that gets really, yeah. Time frames, people, but you know what I mean. I think that they're heading in a very good direction. As for expansions, well, you said, is it a good idea for an expansion every 18 months? Well, I think it's actually a good idea. Well, let's go from a few different perspectives in this one, because there's also the perspective of money, and the fact that every expansion does cost a bit of cash, an extra wad on top of the normal subscription fee. So I think that, yes, an expansion every 18 months does make a pretty decent deal of sense, because you get 3 raid tiers in the expansion, and you get quite a lot of patches in between, and that allows you to do some decent story stuff. However, sometimes it can feel a little bit long in the tooth. Right now, Mists of Pandaria is, well, to me, it's, because here's the thing, I only started playing this expansion properly in late December last year, because I subscribed in the September it came out. I sort of popped back into the game, but I didn't really play it after I got through the Jade Forest, because I was just busy. So for me, this expansion and its setting, while I do love the setting and the music and the art for at least some of the zones, it's starting to get old, and I want Warlords kind of quick. Well, quick-ish, quicker than normal. So I think they need to keep on giving people fresh experiences, fresh zones, and that sort of thing that only an expansion can bring. And because of that, 18 months is fine, but really, every year would be okay. Now, if there was an expansion every year, well, first of all, actually, there's a strong likelihood there will be. They actually said this recently, that they would ideally really like to have an expansion every year. So, let's have a little bit of a talk about that. First of all, what does it mean for us as players and our game? Well, I'll talk about money in a bit, but right now, the game itself. What this means is that we're getting new tile sets, new zones, it's kind of like a new slate every year, and I think that is definitely quite compelling. I think that's quite cool. One thing that really keeps people going is when they're in zones and places like that they feel engaged in, and they don't really feel old. And I think that sometimes places start to feel really old after 18 months, especially in that final 4-month period where you're just getting killed. And honestly, this whole yearly expansion thing, I think that it may end up just being the normal expansion cycle, but without the ridiculous near year-long waits that we have at the end. I mean, I think that's the major problem with the expansion release schedule, has been those giant waits at the end. And if they're going to get rid of this, then that means we're getting close to expansion every year, so we have the same amount of content, we just don't have that shitty wait. And perhaps this 40% team increase would facilitate that. I think that's great. Other things that a new expansion does, it allows you to explore a new setting. Okay, a bunch of zones are fine, but all those zones have to be cohesive in terms of the world that they're placed in, such as Draenor, Pandaria, Northrend. While, of course, I personally could spend about 18 years in Northrend. You know what I mean. It's nice to have a new set of things to spice stuff up, a new enemy, a new sort of thing like that. And an expansion every year does allow them to do that. Personally, I think it would be great for the game itself. It would keep a lot of people from a subscriber base sort of standpoint invested in the game. We would get new and interesting zones and places to go to, because believe me, they have a lot of lore and they have multiple expansions after this planned out. It's very obvious about that, and it's all going to have a cohesive story. And the fact that we're hearing about this cohesive story and the fact there's multiple expansions, does this mean that we're going to be going on quite the adventure in the next few years? I think we could, and that would be really fantastic. Now let's talk about money, because, you know what, money's a thing a lot of people care about, and naturally, I'm a student, I get it, money is a bitch. So, a new expansion would, if it follows the current business model, mean you're dropping however many dollars or pounds every year. So what I'd say is that if it is going to be an expansion every year, then okay, maybe drop at $5-10, although I don't particularly care. One thing that's worth saying, by the way, subscriptions for MMOs have not scaled with inflation. They are still the same price they were 10 years ago, and I suppose that's probably a good thing. It's definitely good that Blizzard never increase the subscription price. First of all, a lot of people leave the game, and second, it would set a different precedent for how much a subscription MMO costs. But yeah, I think people's main issue about this is, and a lot of people, I've even seen in the comments, people saying, oh, they're just going to milk the subscribers, a new expansion every year, yeah. Well, it's new content, and new expansion is a big new wad of content, so I mean, personally I find it hard to complain about that sort of thing. Also, the dev team is increasing a lot from Warlords. If we take, say, mid Warlords of Draenor level to pre-Mists of Pandaria level, the team will have increased by 80% according to numbers that we've been given. That means the game's development cost in terms of wages has doubled, and of course it's not just wages. It's wages, computers, HR, all the different things that surround those employees. Of course, perhaps server costs and things like that don't really scale as much with the team, but still, there's an increase in cost, but it does mean there's an increase of products coming out, and I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. Blizzard have, I think, done quite a good job of increasing the quality of the game. A lot of people are probably thinking, oh, well, are they going to Activision it, annualize it, make it so that it's not as good? I think it's different with an MMO. It's not like it's Call of Duty, where you do one every year and you run the franchise slowly into the ground. And Call of Duty is by no means being ran into the ground, but it's, I think, probably a little bit past its peak at the minute. That said, it's still going to be very successful for a long time, in my opinion. Well, yeah, it's not my favourite series, let's be honest, but anyway. With an MMO, it's a sort of thing that is constantly developed, constantly evolved, and it's not like an expansion is a sequel. An expansion adds to the current formula and maybe changes some issues. So it's really hard to fuck up quality-wise from expansion to expansion. Another thing that's worth saying is a lot of the people from Project Titan, and these people were the people who were pulled off World of Warcraft when Titan was really going to be a thing, and that this was really just after Burning Crusade and some of the initial Wrath stuff. So the main people who were responsible for this game getting to 12.1 million subscribers, a lot of those guys are back at World of Warcraft now, because Titan has been, I suppose, knocked back a few years. They had to do some major retooling and things like that. As a World of Warcraft person, that's actually a good thing that happened to Titan. So yeah, there's that. Now, in terms of personally stuff, I don't care. Really, money is the sort of thing where if I am getting a decent amount of enjoyment out of something, I'm happy to pay a premium. This, of course, is not something that is shared by a lot of people, probably including a lot of my audience, and I totally understand. I've been in places before where the World of Warcraft subscription was something that kind of was a bit of a kick in the arse at the end of the month, because, well, when I was like 15 or 16 or whatever, you kind of, that stuff comes from your own money, and it's like, well, I could not play World of Warcraft for 2 months and buy this Call of Duty game and play it with some of my friends from school, or Halo, because that would be fun. Well, now it's at the stage where, just the way things are going, it's affordable, and World of Warcraft, being an MMO, gives you very good value for money in terms of the amount of hours put in. So I don't find it humongously offensive that the game would perhaps get a little bit more expensive to play because of these annual thingies. What are they called? Expansions, that's it. Oh, I'm getting delirious, all this talking. Next, let's go on to the next question from PK Meg, I think. Do you think the curve of subscriptions is likely going to increase or decrease 3 to 4 months after the release of Warlords of Draenor? Well, I think it's going to increase, and I actually think that overall World of Warcraft is going to have a little bit of a renaissance, which is nice. What do I mean by this? Well, first of all, in the previous quarter, which was the kind of 5.4, 5.3, all this content coming out in that quarter, they only had a drop of 100,000 subscribers. That's in contrast to 600,000 the quarter before, and one of the other quarters was 1.2 million. That's a fucking big slowdown. Over one of the quarters of Mists of Pandaria, that's a slowdown of like 12 times from 1.2 million to 100,000. So there's definitely the tide. Either the tide is very much slowing in terms of people leaving, or they are doing maybe they're starting to flip things around. We're going to have subscription increases. Warlords of Draenor, and when you take circumstantial, or that's not even the right word, whatever, when you take evidence that doesn't really matter from looking at forums and shit like that, there's a lot of people saying, okay, this has got me interested, this garrison feature is really cool, I was a hardcore PvPer and I got disenfranchised, and I think this Trial of the Gladiator is really cool. Or people that enjoy Ashran, or even people who just really liked the older Warcraft stories and want to see these badass orcs, and the way that they're going with the expansion and the story, and how it's, I suppose, it's going to be leading into a wider story arc of World of Warcraft. I think this expansion is going to do a good job bringing people back, and I can see us hitting above 8 million again. I don't think this game's ever going to hit 12 again, no way. I think that's just unfeasible, but I do think that expansions as always, will bring a lot of people back to the game. This one in particular because of just the way it's been handled, and the way they are definitely appealing to some nostalgia in what they're doing, and I'm cool with appealing to nostalgia because, well, while there's a lot of naysaying about nostalgia and stuff like that, it does provide people with some entertainment and enjoyment, so I don't really see the humongous problem as long as people stay objective about it. So in short, the answer to your question is, in my opinion, yes, the curve is going to increase, and the curve of increasing subscriptions is going to increase. We're going to be getting more per quarter for at least the initial period after Warlords of Draenor. Of course, they could completely fuck it up and the game could die, but I don't think that'll happen. And on that bombshell, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, all that good, beautiful stuff, whatever. And if you want to leave a question, do so in the comments. I'll see you next time.